To finish this off, I thought I'd give you a quick look at editing a real project in Resolve, and in fact the thing I'm looking at is this video that you're watching, which was entirely edited in Resolve. Now initially the screen was filmed using a program which creates MP4 files which Resolve will quite happily take. I also record the sound separately onto another computer. So I brought both of them in, both the recorded sound and the MP4 files, whacked them on the timeline and then lined them up. As far as the sound goes, it's basically just me talking, and I always like to clean it up a little bit before I start using it. Now there wasn't anything in Resolve really to do that, so I did that inside of SoundForge. I put a noise gate on it just to get rid of some of the sharp intakes of breath, and then used a leveler just to level it out a little bit. Then I brought that in, and I've got my raw clips on the timeline ready to edit. Then it's just simply a matter of going through the whole thing and chopping out all the bits where I go wrong. At the start here, I certainly don't need that bit there, so all I do is mark an out point with O, an in point with I. This should highlight an area on the timeline, and it doesn't if a clip is selected, like at the moment this clip is selected. So if I click in a blank space, it then highlights the area between the in and the out, and I can press delete to chop it out. And then I go through and listen to the whole thing, and then when I get to another bit that I want to get rid of, it's in, out, delete, and so on. If I want to speed up a section, which I do sometimes when I'm just doing tedious stuff like typing, what I've got to do is chop that bit out. So I'll select where I want to start the slow motion. I'll cut it. I use the keyboard shortcut, move to the end of the bit that actually needs to be speeded up. I've got to click off it, so I can click back and just select the bit that needs to be slowed down, and then I right click on it and go to change speed and type in something like 300% is typically what I do. I haven't got it to ripple sequence or anything, and then that makes that particular part of the video a bit faster. There are occasions when I need to do a freeze frame, so I do exactly the same thing. I go to where I want it to freeze frame, cut it again where I want the freeze frame to stop, click off it, click back on it, right click, change speed, freeze frame, boing, and now I've got a freeze frame for the duration of that bit in the middle. And then I just go through the whole thing, chopping it up like that. If I need to add in a picture, all I do is bring it from the media pool, shove it onto the timeline, and now I've got a picture. If you need to resize it, you select it and use the inspector to resize it. I also put captions in various places, and to do that, I went to the effects library and then just put some text on here, click, start typing. Obviously choose typeface and set it up how you like. In my case I used impact and I put a drop shadow on it, a very small slight drop shadow, and I use that for everything. Because I use that quite a lot, I set up a title bin and I just dragged the one that I've made from the timeline up into the bin. Now the next time I need a caption, all I've got to do is grab that out of the bin and I get a new caption, but my text is set up with the kind of font and shadow that I liked. Now, having done the edit, the next thing to do was to go through and pan and scan it. You know, there's bits where we zoom into parts of the screen to make it more obvious what we're talking about. So, I made up another timeline, obviously named it, and nested one timeline inside of another. So I'll get to a point where I want to zoom in, and then I'll come over to the inspector and just add in a keyframe on zooming and position. I then generally move forward about 2 seconds, and then zoom in a bit and move it. I'd either use the numbers or click on this and then just do it by hand. And then you get a nice zoom in. I also ticked this little box down here because it shows me where the keyframes are on the timeline, which just helps me to work out exactly where I am. The one thing I had to be careful about was using the reset button. If you're not careful, when you press the reset button, it deletes all the keyframes on the track. It just doesn't just reset that particular keyframe at that point. The other thing is adding on the titles. So what I did is I've got a standard background that I use, which is this. This kind of animation with the lens flares coming in and everything else is something I can't do in Resolve. So all of that was actually made up in another program. It's in fact made up in After Effects. And all I did was add in the words for the particular chapter. Add in a track by right-clicking here and say Add Track, get the text, whack it onto the timeline, and then call it something, and obviously size it to fit it in the right place. So I'm just going to make it a little bit smaller, and then just click on it to move it into the right place. I then had to animate it, and I did say that I had this problem where if I sort of make it fly on and then fly off again, it sort of wobbled in the middle. So to get around that, what I actually did was I sort of flew it in, just coming down to position and sticking a keyframe where it finishes and going back to the start and then moving it off screen. I did get this slight problem that I couldn't get the thing to move all the way off screen using the numbers. And apart from just picking it up and dragging it, the other way I found to solve that was to click on the anchor position up here and stick the anchor position at the start of the text, and that let me fly it completely off screen. But the next problem I've got is I then had to get it to fly off, and I said if I actually put an animation on the end, the stupid thing would actually wobble in the middle. So what I did was then cut this title in half and then stuck the animation on the end half. And the next time I had to use this title, I just selected that and then copied and pasted it onto the next one. Obviously, I just put a quick cross dissolve at the start and end of the timeline, and then I added a couple of titles and a bit of music to the end, just for the final captions on every particular chapter. The final thing I did was to add a bit of sharpness to this so it looks slightly clearer on YouTube. Now to do that, I went to the Color tab, which like I said is where you put on all the effects, and actually sharpness is one of the things which is built into the grading tools. You click on this little thingy-bob here, and if you go to the radius, if you drag it one way, it gets blurrier. If you drag it the other way, it gets sharper. Now, I didn't put much on there. I dragged it from the midpoint, which is at 50, down to about 47 or 46. I thought that would just help it slightly when you're watching it on YouTube to see everything a little bit clearer. Whilst I was editing, I was monitoring everything on a TV through an Intensity Pro 4K because it's the only way I could get my edit to go up full screen. The final thing was to get the stuff out and ready for YouTube. So I went to the Deliver page, and actually all I did do was choose the YouTube setting, set it to 1080, and export it. On the YouTube setting, I just left it at the defaults, but the picture came out pretty well. Things like these screenshots actually do encode very well because there's not an awful lot going on. So they do make reasonably small files. If you're making proper videos, they're going to be bigger than the ones that I made up. The other thing about the export is you'll notice that on the audio for YouTube, you've only got the option of linear PCM, which is going to make the files bigger than they need to be. But that's the only option I've got, so that's what I used. I just added the chapters into the render queue, exported them, uploaded them to YouTube, and that was it. I was able to export it in a format that was good enough for where I was going, and the stuff I filmed in actually worked in the first place. And the only real issue I kind of had was I could have done with a few arrows here and there to point things out, and there aren't any ways of drawing arrows or anything like that inside of the Resolve. About the only thing you can do in terms of graphics is you can use a title like this, and you can have a background with an outline on it, which I'm going to make red. And then if I draw that out, you can see there, I've now got a box. Finally, all I did was whack down the opacity, so I didn't have any color in the middle, but it left the stroke there for me. So I could highlight a few things with a box like that, but I couldn't do arrows or anything. When I had any arrows on any graphics, I had to knock those up in another program first. Apart from that, it worked pretty well. So hopefully that's given you an overview of using Resolve as an editing program. It's got a lot of nice stuff in it. It's weak in some areas, the titling is particularly naff, but the biggest problem with it is basically getting stuff in and getting stuff out. You're going to have to convert the footage. How you convert it's probably depending on the format that you're filming in, and it's going to take time and it's going to take space. It's not the sort of program that you'll probably use, say, if you're doing a news item, because you're in a hurry and you don't want to have to spend ages converting it in the first place. That's probably the biggest problem with it. The editing with it is quite nice. It's not perfect. There are ways other programs are slightly better, the ways this is better, but it's actually got to be very good and it's very usable. And like I say, there's a free version that works 100%. Your biggest problem is probably going to be needing to have a decent system to run it on, but obviously you can talk to us about that. We do lots of systems like that. Your only other problem is if you're editing, especially if you're editing for a living, do you want to rely on a program which is free? You know, if it crashes a lot and there's a bug, do you know if they're going to fix it? And to be perfectly honest, no, you don't. Obviously, you could pay for it, and then there's this kind of obligation on them. But at least if you've paid it for it, you've got some way of coming back to them and saying, fix it. Whereas if you're using a free program, what kind of comeback have you got? I've started to use it for some of my editing. So some of the Premiere Pro tutorial I actually did in Resolve. And it worked very well. I did then go and finish some bits off in Premiere because there were certain things that definitely worked a bit faster in Premiere. When it came to exporting it in particular, I needed to go out to an MP4 file and I need to make it with a particular exporting plugin that I had for Premiere, which made nice small files, which I can then upload to YouTube or put on a tutorial DVD, and I couldn't do any of that in Resolve, so that definitely proved to be faster in Premiere. The titling was definitely faster in Premiere. There were things like the audio effects on the timeline to smooth out my voice definitely worked better in Premiere than it did in Resolve. But one big advantage I have for some of my projects in Resolve, especially if I'm collaborating with other people, is we can all be on the same version. It's free, so there's no reason for any of us not to use the latest version, which means we can definitely swap projects between us and media between us quite happily, and we all know that they're all going to work in our computers. Anyway, I hope that's helped you. I hope it's given you a good overview. If you are interested in getting a full Resolve tutorial, let us know. We haven't made one yet, but we're thinking about it. And if enough people are interested, then we will go ahead and make a full in-depth Resolve tutorial. And obviously we can do things like training courses on it as well. Just give us a ring if you want some more information. Or you can visit our website, www.dvc.uk.com, for more information. And if you follow us on Facebook, we will have different news items popping up about Resolve and other programs there. And of course, there's the YouTube channel, which you're watching at the moment. Finally, you can give us a ring on 01273 205 700. Thanks for watching.